And thank you very much for the organizers for inviting me to this absolutely amazing. I haven't seen so much crowd ever since I visited a dharna in JNU. I think it's just... And by the way, I'm from JNU, so it's actually very good that the questions would be at the end, because nowadays anybody who raises a hand, I think he or she is asking for azadi. So, but to come back to this topic, I am a free speech absolutist. So I believe that dissent, good or bad, should be allowed. So there is room for good dissent, and there is room for bad dissent. And I would say ridicule all other isms except criticism. But the problem that we are seeing ever since 2014 is it's almost like a Cambrian explosion, as we call in science, as if that anything bad that has ever happened in this country, anyone who's been ever ruined, the economy, the institutions, the people, the corruption, has happened since 2014. Before 2014, everything was absolute. It was like a Garden of Eden, people strolling out and onto a beach, and everything was absolutely nice. There were no riots, there was no lynching, India wasn't Lynchistan, there was no emergency, the judges were absolutely perfect, the institutions, RBI was working, the best central bank in the world, our cricket was in great shape, and our journalists were just brilliant journalists, and everything went wrong on 16th of May 2014 when Mr. Modi was elected. Now, the point is, you can have that view. In my book, of course, you can have that view. I mean, don't people still believe in stupid, loony views? Don't people still believe in communism? So, the point of the matter is, when you have seen over the last 80 years, all nations that were communists being destroyed by this ideology, and you still have millions of Indians still believe in communism and worship Mao and worship Lenin, what do you have to say about human nature and human tendency? Of course you would find such people. And the point is not to ban them, the point is to laugh at them and to expose them. So I am for good dissent as well as for bad dissent. The problem with bad dissent is that very quickly it can lead to scaremongering, and that is a problem. So you can actually have bad dissent as long as you are not scaremongering people, and the scaremongering, the genesis of scaremongering is selectivity. And this is what we have seen since 2014. And I come back to this thing of explosion, Cambrian explosion. Everything bad has happened since 2014. And just to give you, and I would like to give a couple of examples. I still have 6 minutes left. She has really scared me, So, this thing about India being called a Lynchistan, and Dalits being lynched, Muslims being lynched, and this whole thing about emergencies here, growing and creeping, intolerance, everything is growing and creeping. It's like, you're on the seabed, writhing like an octopus, and everything is growing and creeping all around you. So let me give you a couple of examples, and I would love to have a show of hands here. It's a very attentive audience, which is very refreshing, coming from JNU, where half people are sleeping in the audience. Everyone knows about Akhlaq, right? The person who was lynched. How many of you know about Akhlaq? Could you raise your hands, please? Yeah, so that's about 90% of hands went up. How many of you know who was Sawant Rathod? 5 hands. Who was Mukesh from Champaran? 2 hands. Who was Khitaram Bhil? 1 hand. Who was Junaid? 5 hands. Who was Farooq? 1 hand. These were people, Dalits and Muslims, who were lynched by Muslims. We don't know their names. They have been forgotten after pages of history books, but we know only Akhlaq. Pause and wonder why that is so. In the last 1 year, there have been more than 100 attacks, lynchings, attempted lynchings by Muslim mobs on Muslims, on Hindus, on Dalits. They just don't appear in the news. They just slip away. There have been more than 36 attacks by Muslim mobs on Dalits, lynchings, attempted lynchings. We don't hear of them. So this is where you can have bad dissent. You can say that, yes, lynchings are happening. But if you are selective about it, this leads to scaremongering. This leads to people believing that India has suddenly gone down the drain in the last 4 years, that all these things weren't happening before, all these things are happening now.